encourage you to stay with me in principle. Stay with me to the end so that we can, after we've established a principle, get this out right yet. I want to make an important point about our nation, but you have to stay with me. Okay, and I'm going to have to move fast, and I hope that Teresa, who's operating the PowerPoint, can stay with me back there. I think the scripture on the screen is out of the New American Standard Translation. For though we walk in the flesh, we do not war, notice that word, according to the flesh. The NIV kind of translates like that to get the idea of we do not war according to the way men wage warfare. For the weapons of our warfare are not of the flesh, but divinely powerful, for the destruction of fortresses. We are destroying speculations and every lofty thing raised up against the knowledge of God. And we're taking every thought captive to the obedience of Christ. And the point that the Apostle Paul is making is that Christians are involved in war, but it is not a war with guns, swords, tanks, airplanes, bombs. We fight with words, thoughts, ideas. The Christian faith has its origin in Jesus. Now we're familiar with his life story. Born in Bethlehem as an infant, taken to Egypt, returned to Israel, spent his childhood in Nazareth of Galilee. At age 30, his preaching ministry began. At age 33, he was executed by crucifixion in Jerusalem. 3 days after his execution, he resurrected from the dead, and for 40 days he appeared to his disciples. He then ascended into heaven. His apostles waited for 10 days in Jerusalem as he had instructed them to do. And on the day of Pentecost in the year 33, Pentecost was a Jewish festival. The apostles were baptized with the Holy Spirit, and the first Christian sermon was preached. That sermon was that Jesus was crucified. By the predetermined plan of God, he was buried and he resurrected from the dead, fulfilling prophecy of the coming Messiah. Jesus, therefore, is the promised Messiah, or Christ. On that day, the day of Pentecost in the year 33, some 3,000 people obeyed Peter's command to be baptized in the name of Jesus Christ for the forgiveness of sins and the gift of the Holy Spirit. Those people became Christians out of their personal faith that Jesus is the Christ. Now notice I said personal faith. That Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God. That he died for our sins, was buried, and resurrected on the third day. This had to do with an individual, personal conviction about the person of Jesus. And so the Church of Jesus Christ was born, and the faith spread rapidly. The book of Acts records the spread of that faith, beginning in Jerusalem and then into the surrounding territory of Judea, then up into Samaria and to Damascus of Syria, to the Gentiles at the household of Cornelius, to Antioch, to Crete, to Turkey, to the rest of the Roman Empire. And by the time we come to the end of the book of Acts, the gospel is being preached in the city of Rome. That was concerning the first century church. Now, as far as the Roman Empire was concerned, Christians were a sect of the Jews. Rome had no political interest in the church. The first persecution against Christians came at the instigation of the Jews. Now, I don't have any time to document that today, and it's considered in our day and time anti-Semitic to say it. Nevertheless, it's the truth. Those who believed in Christ, the believers, had a very simple faith that Jesus was the Messiah. They lived a Christ-like life. It was known as the way. There were no church buildings. no church hierarchy. They assembled in schools, in public assembly areas, public assembly halls, in homes, wherever they could find a place to get together. I would point out to you that the first Christians, the apostles, performed no weddings. They had no political standing. When we come to the time of Nero, the Roman emperors began to persecute the Christians. There were several reasons for this I mentioned briefly. Rome declared their emperors to be deity. Every citizen of the empire was to go to a temple, burn incense, and say Caesar is Lord. To say that Caesar is Lord means he's a god. Christians could not do that. And because of that, they were persecuted. There was a major persecution by the Emperor Nero who, in the years 54 through 68. Most historians believe that when the city of Rome burned, people were saying that Nero burned the city, and in order to get the blame off himself, he blamed the Christians. It was Nero who dipped Christians in pitch and burned them alive, using them as torches in his garden. Domitian, the emperor, persecuted Christians. Persecution was at that time sporadic, geographically limited. Trajan persecuted the Christians in Jerusalem, Antioch, and Bithynia. There was a universal persecution by the Roman Empire by Decius. In AD 250, he issued an edict for universal persecution. All Roman officials were to persecute Christians. Christians were to be killed. If they failed, their property would be confiscated. The longest and most severe persecution came under Diocletian, 284-305. There came a time in the 300s when Constantine was at war with other Roman generals for control of the Roman Empire. He claimed he had a vision of the cross and the words, "In this sign conquer." He won the war, and in 313 issued what is known as the Edict of Milan, which issued complete toleration to Christians. And the persecution ended. Now, in the following centuries, Christianity and the Roman government merged. This began with Constantine. I have a list here of things that happened under his emperorship. Churches allowed to receive inheritances. Civil judges and workers were to refrain from working on Sunday. All clergy was exempt from taxes. Bishops' decisions were to be recognized in the civil courts. Notice that merging of government and religion. Governors were to observe Christian festival days. He prohibited the Jews from harming Jewish Christians. Government making rules about religion. The government spent money to build church buildings, and they rebuilt old church buildings. Now I'm going to give you a few illustrations of how government and religion merged. One example was the Donatist controversy. This had to do with Christians who had fallen away during the persecutions of Diocletian. Some Christians were unwilling to accept these lapsed Christians as church leaders. However, at Carthage, people selected a man by the name of Donatus who had lapsed. They selected him to be bishop. Constantine called the Council of Arles in 314 and ruled against the Donatists. Notice, the Roman emperor declaring who can or cannot be a bishop in the church. Politics is now beginning to rule. Politicians are beginning to decide what can and cannot be done within the Christian faith. The church became a pawn of politics. Bishops are now political figures. They're chosen as much out of their political position as they are for their piety. That didn't happen all at once, over a short span. It happened over a long period of time. But I want you to notice something. that this marks a very far removal from the original Christians who believed in Jesus as the Christ and lived a simple life of godliness, striving to live the fruits of the Spirit. They had no political ambitions. Christianity then was a matter of personal conviction and personal faith. I want to give you some illustrations of the continuation of and the increase of church involvement in politics and vice versa. There was a leader in the church by the name of Galatius who promoted a theory called the Galatian theory. He said that there are two powers that exist. There's secular power and then there's spiritual power. The spiritual power, he said, is over secular power. In other words, the leaders of the church have authority over the government of the land, the emperor, the king, whoever. In time, this meant that the Pope was over the secular rulers and kings, and this came to be. In some locations, for example, in Germany, the secular rulers dominated the papacy. Charles the Great, we know as Charlemagne, dominated the church. He established what was called the Holy Roman Empire. Now, the principle that I'm wanting you to see through all this, and I'll repeat this more than once, is this: that religion became a matter of political power. Politics and religion began to operate together. There was for centuries a long struggle for power. Who was more powerful, the kings or the church? Church leaders called for secular. Military leaders, the kings, for backing to maintain power. If they got into a theological controversy, they would ask the king to send an army and put down what they considered the heretics. In Rome, the Pope was being dominated by the nobility. So he called for the German king to come to his rescue. So Otto brought his German army and defeated the nobility of Rome. And so AD 962, the Pope crowned Otto I as Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire. Notice what's going on there. I can't think all this through for you. You've got to do some of the mental work yourself. Now here's what's interesting about this. Otto then dominated the papacy through the use of power and military. He appointed the nobles as bishops. You understand that? He appointed the nobles. He had been called there to rescue the Pope from the nobles. Then he appointed the nobles as the bishops in the church. They were secular rulers. The nobles were enemies of the church, and yet Otto appointed them as the bishops. Now this led to a controversy known as the lay investiture controversy. Now all this is going to have a point, if you'll stay with me. Very, very important point. The lay investiture controversy was asking the question, who appoints bishops, kings, or the popes? Now here's an example of that. Hildebrand, Gregory VII, was the pope from 1073 to 1085. Lay investiture involved this power struggle between the papacy and kings. If the issue is this: if John Jones is to be appointed as a bishop, who's he going to be loyal to, and who appoints him? The king or the pope? Hildebrand contended that loyalty to God meant loyalty to the pope. But the kings were appointing the bishops. And the bishops owed their loyalty to the king who appointed them. And all I want you to see out of this is the struggle between government and religion and the merging of the two. That's the point of all this. This led to a practice called simony, based on Simon the sorcerer, who tried to purchase the apostolic gift of laying on of hands in Acts chapter 8. Simony was the practice of purchasing a church office. If you wanted to be a bishop or an archbishop, you went to the king or whoever, and if you offered him enough money, then you got appointed. You offered the right authority, the right amount of money, you became a bishop or archbishop. It had little to do with Christianity. It was pure politics. Here's an example of how that worked. Henry IV was king of Germany. He appointed the Archbishop of Milan. Pope Gregory VII, Hildebrand denounced Henry for doing that and excommunicated him. And January the 25th to the 28th of 1077 at the Castle Canossa, Henry, the king, was reduced to begging, standing in the snow in his bare feet, begging for mercy from Hildebrand. Hildebrand forgave him and restored him to kingship, but then Henry took an army and invaded Italy, and Gregory had to flee for his life. The struggle between church and politics. Eventually, the papacy gained the upper hand, and I wish I could tell you that whole story. It's a very, very fascinating story. I want to give you an illustration of how politics and religion work. There came into existence a group of people known as the Cathari. They taught things that you and I would probably believe to be heresy. They taught that there's a good God and an evil God. They rejected many of the Roman Catholic beliefs and practices. So what happened? The Pope called a crusade against the Cathari. Thousands of people were slaughtered, burned at the stake. An inquisition was established. People were tortured. One of the methods of torture was to fry the bottom of people's feet. Or they would be thrown in prison and fed only bread and water. Again, all I'm doing here is trying to make a point that in the name of Christ, church leaders use armies to force people to a certain theology. And they tortured or killed those who would maintain their conviction. By the way, this isn't one-sided. It's going to go back the other way here directly. In the 600s, the Muslims came to power and expanded their territory. Jerusalem fell to the Muslims in 638. And so there came into being the Christian-Muslim wars. Notice that. Christian wars. Remember why Paul said we war? There was a real military threat. To the Muslims, this was an expansion of the true faith. To the Christian, Islam was a threat to the true faith. So there was a series of crusades. The crusades were both political and religious. One, they wanted to free the Holy Land. One, they hoped to reunite the East and West churches. There had been a division. And then there was commercial and materialistic reasons. But what I want you to see is the mixing of politics and religions. The Christian flag is what the Christians carried into war. There are some Christians who believe that we should not even have a Christian flag, that it was a symbol of war. Altogether, there were 8 crusades. The first crusade in 1099 captured the city of Jerusalem, and history says the streets ran red with blood, all in the name of Christ under the Christian flag. Those wars continued until the year 1270. Now what I want you to see is how far removed the church had come from the way of Christ and his disciples. Governments merged with religion and perverted the Christian faith and what Jesus intended it be. Political and theological issues were finally challenged by Martin Luther. Roman Catholic monk who called for reforms within Roman Catholicism. And I can't tell you the whole story of that. This led to what is known as the Reformation, and it began on October the 31st of 1517, when Martin Luther, the Roman Catholic monk, made 95 theses that he wanted to debate on the castle door, or the church door. Now let's look at Germany for just a moment. Out of the Reformation, there came into existence the Lutherans, the German church, became a state church. In the year 1529, the German king, Charles V, ordered no more reforms. This is a government. Roman Catholic worship had to be restored. All Roman Catholic property and any income that had been confiscated was to be restored. And the Lutherans protested this. They wrote the Protestatio in 1529. That's where the term Protestant came from. That's why I'm not a Protestant. I'm not protesting anything. Out of this, in 1618, there began what is known as the 30 Years' War. To a very large degree, was a war between Protestants and Catholics. Religion and politics. A secular ruler establishing a national religious policy and using the power of office and military might to establish religion. A lot of Reformation churches came into existence. Many of the reformers did not hesitate to use political power to further their own cause. And they give you an example, the Anabaptists. They wanted more reforms. In 1527, they held a meeting at Augsburg to send out preachers. This became called the Martyrs' Synod. Most of those preachers were killed. They were roasted alive. They were drowned, suffocated by other reformers. In France, there came into the group of people we know as the Huguenots. They followed the reformer Calvin. There was about 500,000 of them, 400,000 of them. Civil wars broke out between the Huguenots and the Roman Catholics. In August the 24th of 1572, by arrangement of the king's mother, who didn't like Protestants, there came what we know as the massacre of Bartholomew Day. 8,000 Huguenots were killed just in Paris in that morning. In 1598, Henry IV, a Roman Catholic, issued the Edict of Nantes, granting toleration to all Protestants. Toleration finally came. It was granted by a king, King of France. Again, I want you to see what happens when governments become enmeshed in religious issues. I want to go quickly to Scotland, give you 3 examples. Scotland, at this period in history, was under the rule of the French. Patrick Hamilton began to spread Martin Luther's doctrine. He was apprehended, sent to Beaton, who was the Archbishop of St. Andrews. After a long trial, he was burnt to stake. March 1st, 1527, in his 24th year. George Wishart studied under Martin Luther. He returned to Scotland to preach. History records it like this: while preaching at various places in the neighborhood of Edinburgh, he was apprehended by the Cardinal's troops. Notice that, Cardinal's troops. Conveyed to St. Andrews, tried for heresy, condemned to be burnt at the stake, and was executed March 28th of 1546. John Knox, who became the founder really of Presbyterianism, wanted to revenge Wishart's death, so he and others then killed Cardinal Beaton, 1547. reformers, preachers, Christians. Knox was captured by the French troops, put in a French galley for 19 months, released in 1549, returned to Scotland, got the backing of England's Queen Elizabeth, and drove the French from Scotland. In August of 1560, Roman Catholicism was abolished in Scotland by law. Presbyterians became the state church. Again, what I want you to see, the use of armies to establish a theological point of view. Moved to England. Henry VIII was a loyal Roman Catholic. He opposed Martin Luther's writing. He was known as the defender of the faith. But he married Catherine of Aragon, but he fell in love with Anne Boleyn. And he wanted his marriage to Catherine nullified so he could marry Anne, and the Pope refused to do that. So Henry appointed Thomas Cranmer, Archbishop of Canterbury. Thomas nullified Henry's marriage to Catherine. Henry then married Anne Boleyn. Their daughter is Elizabeth. Now remember, according to the Roman Catholic Church, of which England was, this is considered an adulterous marriage, and Elizabeth is illegitimate. The Pope excommunicated Henry, but in 1534, in the Act of Supremacy, England split with Roman Catholicism and formed the Anglican or Church of England. The King of England was considered the head of the church. Look at that. Eventually, Elizabeth becomes the queen. Remember, she's considered by Roman Catholics as an illegitimate person. Because of that, she's forced to be a Protestant, and she persecuted Catholics. In 1559, the Supremacy Act made the monarch of England head of the church, merging of politics and religion. The Archbishop of Canterbury, head of the Church of England, persecuted the separatists, the Puritans. He executed them by hanging them. He passed laws, now I want you to remember this, prohibiting meetings. In 1625, 1649, King Charles I, the Puritans, Presbyterians, Congregationalists, Separatists, Baptists were all persecuted. This led to a lot of people coming to America. In 1640s, Charles took his army to move against Scotland. Oliver Cromwell joined in with others and trying to hurry here. And Charles was defeated and beheaded. Religious toleration did come to England under James II and William and Mary. And we skip on a little faster here. What I want you to see is from the time of the early Roman Empire, from the 4th century in Constantine, Christianity became entwined with government, politics, and struggles for power. The Reformation changed little of that. The Reformers continued to use political power to further their cause. Reformers persecuted other reformers and Roman Catholics. Is it any wonder that Europeans want little to do with the church? I want you to think about that. Now, I've done all this so that we can get some idea of the brilliance of the founding fathers of the United States. Now, finally have come to the point. Constitution, Article 6, Section 3. The senators and representatives before mentioned and the members of the several state legislature and all executive and judicial officers, both of the United States and several states, shall be bound by oath or affirmation to support this Constitution, but no religious test shall ever be required as a qualification to any office or public trust under the United States. That's only brilliant. Think back over what little bit of the history of Europe and Christianity I'll try to tell you, and what happened when Christianity merged with government. and see how brilliant these people were when they established the Constitution of the United States. Look at the First Amendment. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. Remember all the laws, the kings and so on, that had passed laws and issued edicts prohibiting people, certain people, from meeting and practicing their faith? Remember the torture? Remember the wars, the armies? But in this country, that was not going to be. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech. And I believe that had to do with the preaching of Christianity, whatever your view of it may be. We have the press, and I think that had to do with the right of every religious group to publish their papers and their books. This is all about religion. Or the right of the people to peaceably to assemble. You remember the king who said, this group of people is not allowed to assemble? But our founding fathers said, no religious group, our government will not interfere. We can assemble here this morning freely because of the brilliance of the founding fathers of this country. You'll notice this says nothing about separation of church and state. You're wondering, how is that possible? Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. Anyone who has even a shallow, superficial knowledge of history, this ought to be abundantly clear. That's what I'm trying to do for you this morning. There would be no law establishing a state church or an official religion. The government would keep its long political nose out of religion. Government and religion are divorced in that respect. There would be no Protestant church using government to promote its religious cause, nor there would be no laws passed against Roman Catholics, Puritans, Anglicans, or anyone. There would be no Roman Catholic church using government to promote its religious cause, nor to pass laws against Protestantism. That's what the First Amendment's about. At the same time, and I'm getting close to the end. I know I'm long this morning, but I think this is important. At the same time, these were men of Christian faith. I don't think it ever occurred to them that the religion of the United States would be anything but Christian. You examine their speeches and their writings, and that is documented. It would have never have occurred to them to exclude reference to God and Christ from public life. Now listen, as I draw this to a close. Listen to these excerpts from the Declaration of Independence. When in the course of human events, it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political band which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and nature's God entitle them. A decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to separate. These men believed in God, and that's included in the Declaration of Independence. Very obvious. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. You think George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, any of those people would hesitate to offer prayer at Fort Wright High School graduation or Waterford graduation or any high school? They believed that in the freedom to practice your faith. They did not talk about separation of religion and public life. It's just that Congress could not establish an official religion and pass laws against another group. That's what was intended. In the Statement of Independence, and for the support of this declaration with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and sacred honor. These men were men of faith in God. It was never their intention that God or Christ would be separated from public life or from government. Now, by the way, Congress still has not passed any laws against any religion. Those laws that are being handed down to the court system. You need to pay attention to what's going on. It was the courts who said you can't pray in schools. It was courts who said you can't read the Bible. Total reversal of anything that was ever intended. Because the Founding Fathers intended that anyone had the freedom to practice their religion, and Congress could not pass any law prohibiting it. We're at war, a battle for truth, a battle for minds. And as I remind you, the last part, those early Christians fought with ideas, not armies. Paul said, we walk in the flesh, we do not war according to the flesh. For the weapons of our warfare are not of the flesh, but divinely power for the destruction of fortresses. We are destroying speculations and every lofty thing raised up against the knowledge of God. Now you tell me, if there are voices being raised up in opposition to the knowledge of God in this country, pay attention to what's happening in our country. So with that I close. There's a lot more that I'd like to have said this morning, but I've already taken a lot of your time. We'll be singing number 284.